The movie begins in the bustling city of Bhopal, India, where a family of 4 is driving to their destination, the Awasthi family house. They are here to discuss the potential marriage of their son to the Awasthi's daughter. The son has just returned from London, and his family is eager to find him a suitable wife. We are then introduced to our protagonist, Anita Annie Awasthi, as she scrolls through her relative Rupali's Facebook profile. Rupali, who has settled in Canada after her wedding, represents Anita's dream of living abroad. The prospect of marrying a man who has returned from London thrills Anita, as it aligns with her aspirations of settling in a different country. She excitedly shares her dreams with her maternal aunt, Prabha, who tells her to get ready to meet the boy. After she dresses up, Prabha advises her not to reject this suitor like she did with the others, warning that she might end up single, like her. Their laughter is cut short by the arrival of Annie's mom, who sternly warns her not to create a scene this time and to accept the proposal. Annie reassures her mom that since the boy can take her to London after the wedding, there's no reason to reject him. However, her mom becomes emotional and asks Prabha to talk sense into her. Prabha dismisses her, promising to bring Annie downstairs to meet the guests. Once downstairs, Annie serves tea to the guests, while her face is hidden by a headscarf. The guests are impressed by her manners, but things start to go downhill when they reveal that the boy won't be taking her to London. She quickly removes her headscarf and sighs. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, she boldly informs them that she will only marry a man who can take her to another country. Feeling insulted, the family leaves. Later that day, the Awasthi family sits in sorrow over yet another lost proposal when their neighbor, Indu Tyagi, arrives. Annie's mom immediately begins complaining about Annie's behavior to her. Annie tries to explain that she wants a say in her life decisions, prompting her mom to blame Prabha for Annie's unmarried status. The sisters get into a fight, with Prabha speaking in support of Annie. The argument is interrupted when Indu announces that her son Pushpinder is returning from Dubai after 4 years. Indu borrows their car keys and leaves. The scene then switches to a car driving smoothly on the road, introducing us to the story's protagonist, Pushpinder Tyagi, who has finally come back home. His mom, Indu, and sister, Hema, came to pick him up from the airport. On their way back home, everyone asks about the gifts he brought for them, and he jokingly replies that he, himself, is the gift. When they learn he's home for a long vacation, his mom gets angry, remarking that a long vacation means less salary. Turns out that she plans to marry him off and send him back in 15 days. Pushpinder sighs, since her mom has been planning to marry him for the past 6 years, and still nothing has happened. Back home, Indu orders her husband to contact the lawyer family in Mathura and talk to them regarding Pushpinder's proposal. As he leaves, Indus's mother-in-law warns her to not be greedy in her demand of dowry, or else Pushpinder will remain single. But Indu justifies her desire for a large dowry by explaining that she plans to use it for Hema's future dowry, revealing her greed and need for money. Ignoring her mother-in-law's dig at her, Indu orders Pushpinder to get ready to meet a family who is arriving to meet him. She focuses on specially dressing up like a Dubai returnee to maintain an impression on the others. The conversation then turns towards Annie and how she rejected another proposal today. Indu doesn't seem smitten by Annie and her attitude. Meanwhile, at the Awasthi house next door, Mrs. Awasthi can be seen getting ready to leave for the Tyagi house. She is there to help Indu entertain the guests. The conversations at the Tyagi house reveal that there is more interest in Pushpinder's life and income in Dubai, rather than his personality. Suffocated by all this focus, he goes out onto the roof to smoke a cigarette and notices Annie drying clothes on the roof next door. Intrigued, he attempts to get closer but is stopped by Annie, who scolds him for sneaking glances at women's clothes. He apologizes and introduces himself as Hema's brother. Recognizing him, she looks him over and comments that he doesn't look the way she thought, not at all like a gentleman. Curious about his life abroad, she starts asking him questions. Pushpinder reveals he works as an accountant in Dubai, but their conversation is cut short when his younger brother Ika arrives. As Pushpinder leaves with his brother, he reflects that his mother was right about one thing. Though Annie is beautiful, she is quite talkative. Later that day, Annie meets Hema, and they both head out to buy some jewelry. On their way to the market, Annie asks about Pushpinder and if he loves someone back in Dubai. But Hema laughs, calling her brother an innocent man. As they both laugh at Pushpinder's fate, he arrives on his bike, offering to drop them at the market. Once at the jewelry shop, Annie starts trying different items, and Pushpinder watches her with unfiltered curiosity. They both almost get into a fight when he asks her about her lover. After shopping, they go out to a stall to eat panpuri, and this is when someone spots them. Back home, Annie shows the jewelry to her family, and her parents are pleasantly surprised at how she got so much jewelry for such a low price. But the surprise vanishes when she informs them that the jewelry, except for 2 bangles, is fake. Her mom starts scolding her, and Indu also warns her that she cannot take fake jewels to her in-laws. But Ani remains calm, insisting that she'll simply tell everyone the jewelry is real. Both Indu and Ani's mom are against this plan, but Prabha and Hema nod in agreement. Indu leaves disgruntled upon hearing that Annie is against dowry and won't marry anyone who would demand a huge dowry from her parents. Later that day, Mrs. Awasti's heart breaks once again when they are informed that another family has rejected to marry Ani, citing rumors that she is not well behaved and only wants to marry to settle abroad. She sighs and once again fights with Prabha. Frustrated, Prabha goes out to tell Annie about the rejection. Instead of being sad at the prospect of being rejected, Annie is haunted by the thought of not being able to settle abroad. She begs Prabha to help her, and Prabha plants the idea of marrying Pushpinder in Annie's mind. Annie is initially resistant because he is older and different from her ideal, but the prospect of settling in Dubai convinces her. She finally gives up and promises to try and win him over, but on the condition that if she finds any better proposal amidst all this, she will leave Pushpinder. The next day, as the Tyagi family settles in the car to leave to see a girl for Pushpinder, Annie spots them. The thought of losing her one chance at settling abroad disturbs her. Determined, she starts plotting her next move. Meanwhile, the Tyagis reach the girl's residence, and Indu is impressed by their riches. On the terrace, Pushpinder and the girl have a meeting, but instead of discussing their future, the girl is preoccupied with eating. Despite not being impressed by her, Pushpinder agrees to the match, revealing his desperation to get married. Back home, the Tyagi family discusses the girl's family and wealth, expressing their admiration, except for Hakim, who comments on the girl's weight. He tries to reason Pushpinder into not marrying, but they all are blinded by the girl's wealth and the huge amount of dowry she would bring. Pushpinder leaves the room and calls Hakim after him. Once outside, Pushpinder confides in Hakim that he is nearing 40 and dreams of getting married. He laments that the only girl he has a chance with is being chased away by Hakim. He admits that he doesn't care about the girl's appearance. He just wants to get married. The next morning, Annie waits outside a temple, brainstorming different ways to win over Pushpinder. When he arrives for his prayers, she tags along and congratulates him on finally getting a girl, but insists that she is not a suitable match and encourages him to reject the proposal. Sensing that she has somewhat convinced him, she leaves, promising to call him later. As he gets back home from the temple, he prepares to discuss his reservations with his mom, but before he could say anything, she surprises him by announcing that the wedding is set for 4 days later. Ani repeatedly calls him, but he does not answer. The next day, as he is leaving his house, she intercepts him, causing him to run back inside. Later, as he buys vegetables from a vendor, she gets hold of him. She complains about not picking up her call, but he ignores her. As he tries to leave once again, furious, Annie warns him that she is leaving because she thought of him as a friend, or else she would have taught him a lesson. The engagement festivities finally start at the Tyagi household, with everyone joyously participating in the rituals. Pushpinder is over the moon at the prospect of finally getting married, but Annie sits alone in her room, heartbroken. After the ceremony, Prabha tells Annie that she missed all the fun staying home, but Annie gets furious at her. She blames Prabha for planting the idea of marrying Pushpinder in her mind, only to end up disappointed. Later that night, the Tyagi family gathers to inspect the gifts brought by the girl's family and is dismayed by their substandard quality. But this is not it. Indu's disappointment turns into pure anger when Pushpinder's engagement ring breaks. His paternal aunt aggravates the situation by suggesting that the girl's family might not provide a good dowry, and this is enough for Indu to call the girl's family. She informs them about the broken ring, and upon asking about the dowry, it is revealed that they are opposed to the idea of giving any. Indu erupts, insulting the girl's weight and asserting that no one would marry her without a dowry. In a fit of fury, she calls off the wedding. Pushpinder's face drops in sadness, but Indu tries to console him by promising to find a better bride soon. The next day, as Pushpinder rides home in a rickshaw, Annie spots him and hops in beside him. He apologizes for misbehaving with her, mentioning that he broke off the wedding. Annie laughs, commenting that it was his mom who called it off because of the dowry. His shoulder drops in embarrassment, and he admits that he is sad. Sympathetic, Annie suggests he find a girl himself and get married. She hints at the idea of marrying her, but he doesn't catch on quickly enough, frustrating her enough to abruptly leave the rickshaw. But this encounter leaves an impression on Pushpinder, and over time, he starts developing feelings for Annie. One day at the park, as she exercises, he approaches her and asks what she meant by her comments the other day. She quickly gets into character and inquires if she isn't suitable to marry him. She then says that she likes him and sits down on a bench. Upon hearing this, Pushpinder admits that he is also in love with her and will convince his mom for their wedding. Meanwhile, at their respective homes, Annie's mom worries about her daughter's whereabouts. Indu criticizes Annie's recklessness compared to her obedient children. Indu then instructs Hema to go and wake up Pushpinder, unaware of what is happening elsewhere. Just then, Pushpinder and Annie arrive together in a rickshaw, adorned with wedding garlands. They reveal they have eloped, shocking everyone present. Annie goes up to her house and informs her parents about her plan. Her mom is furious, but Annie shifts the blame to Prabha, saying she encouraged her actions. Prabha sides with Annie, explaining she did it to relieve them of stress, and urges them to move forward positively. On the other hand, Pushpinder sits with all his family around him. Indu seethes with anger, creating a tense atmosphere where no one dares to speak. Gathering enough courage, Mr. Tyagi encourages Indu to speak, but she gets up and leaves. Mr. and Mrs. Tyagi go to the Awasti abode and comment that they all must be very pleased to receive such an exceptional groom without having to worry about wedding arrangements or dowry. They attempt to apologize, but Indu is in no mood to listen to any nonsense. Mr. Tyagi convinces her that they need to sort out this mess, and to save the honor of her family, she agrees to make the wedding official, on one condition that the Awasti will bear all expenses. The Awasti then try to congratulate on being tied into a new relationship, but Indu leaves. On the other side, Pushpinder's aunt overhears the conversation and spreads the news, causing jubilation among the Tyagi siblings. The wedding celebrations recommence, with Annie and Pushpinder both genuinely happy this time. They remarry in the presence of everyone. Before leaving for her new home, Annie makes a call to Rupali, informing her about her wedding and the fact that she will be settling in Dubai later. Later that night, Annie calls Prabha, expressing nervousness about her first night with Pushpinder. She admits that she married him for his job in Dubai, but finds the prospect of intimacy without genuine feelings daunting. Prabha advises her to dream about herself on top of Burj Khalifa and reassures her that everything will be fine. As she hangs up the call, Pushpinder arrives, apologizing for being late. His presence makes Annie even more apprehensive. Seeing her discomfort, Pushpinder offers her water and holds her hand. Their moment is interrupted when Hakim arrives, claiming he needs to adjust the heater. Before he leaves, Pushpinder's grandmother arrives, remarking that the night is set for their first time together, which further embarrasses Annie. She remains silent as everyone else eventually leaves the room. Pushpinder locks the door and gets into bed, but Annie tries to evade the situation by spending an extended time in the bathroom until Pushpinder falls asleep. When she finally lies down next to him, Pushpinder startles her awake. Before he can touch her, Hema knocks on the door, telling Annie to get ready and giving her a grateful excuse to leave quickly. Later at the ceremony, she tries to stay awake, prompting women to joke about her having a wonderful night causing her drowsiness. Despite this, everyone compliments her beauty and her jewelry. However, one woman accuses Annie's jewelry of being fake, claiming she saw her buying it. But before things can get bad, Pushpinder's aunt arrives and saves the day by giving the lady a shut-up call and calling Annie a rare diamond. The celebration continues as everyone welcomes Annie into the family. Meanwhile, Pushpinder waits for Annie to be free, hoping to fulfill his aspirations from the previous night. As everyone revels in the joyous occasion, fate intervenes unexpectedly. Annie's world is turned upside down when a man arrives and declares her lucky, claiming she's the reason Pushpinder secured a job. This revelation shocked everyone, including the Tyagi family, who were under the impression that Pushpinder was already employed in Dubai. It soon emerges that Pushpinder had actually been fired from his job in Dubai, and that is the reason that he came back. The news hits Annie so profoundly that she faints. On the other hand, Indu confronts Pushpinder angrily, demanding an explanation. He admits he never found the right moment to disclose his job loss to his family. Indu's fury escalates as she berates him for prioritizing marriage over informing them about such a crucial matter. In her anger, she reveals that Annie had rejected previous proposals because they couldn't guarantee her a life abroad. She insists that had Annie known about Pushpinder's unemployment, she would never have consented to the marriage. Despite Mr. Tyagi's attempts to intervene, Indu continues her tirade. Later in their room, Annie and Pushpinder engage in a heated argument. She accuses him of deceit, labeling him a fraud, while he retaliates by calling her a con artist. Their fight escalates with hurtful words exchanged, each blaming the other for their unhappiness. Eventually, Pushpinder storms out of the room, leaving Annie sitting on the bed in tears. The next morning, they visit the Awasti abode, where Pushpinder receives a warm welcome and full protocol from everyone. Mr. Awasi takes Pushpinder to his study, leaving the ladies alone. Annie's mom and aunt are very happy, but their happiness fades when Annie confides in them about the situation with Pushpinder. Annie despairs over her ruined life, but Prabha sternly advises her to stop crying and refrain from making any rash decisions. Meanwhile, in the study, Mr. Awasti expresses his happiness about having Pushpinder as a son-in-law, but acknowledges Indu's discontent with the marriage. To placate her, he offers Pushpinder a check for a substantial amount of 500,000. Pushpinder refuses the money, asserting he will fulfill his mother's wishes through his own hard work, not by accepting dowry. Annie overhears this conversation secretly, and her heart softens as Pushpinder expresses his gratitude to Mr. Awasti for entrusting him with their precious daughter. Mr. Awasti is moved to tears, acknowledging that Annie did a good thing by marrying Pushpinder. As Annie listens outside the study, she snaps out of her despondency and enters with tea for Pushpinder as instructed by her father. Mr. Awasti then leaves to attend to the guests. Once left alone, Annie confronts Pushpinder, questioning whether his earlier statements were genuine or mere words to impress her father. But he replies that he is not like her, asserts that he speaks from the heart and doesn't deceive others. Since he himself is being honest, he turns the question back on her, asking if she truly married him solely for her dream of settling abroad, without any love. Annie's silence speaks volumes, confirming his suspicions. Later that night, at the Tyagi residence, as Annie serves everyone tea, they all compliment the gifts that her parents gave. Pushpinder's aunt, particularly impressed, forgives Annie for marrying for love and declares her support. Annie is relieved and pleased by this acceptance. They continue their tea session until Hakim arrives with mail for Pushpinder. Despite Pushpinder being in the shower, Indu insists Hakim read the letters aloud. As he reads the first line, he gets uncomfortable and says that it seems like a private letter and that it's better not to read. But Indu's stern gaze is enough for him to keep going. Turns out that the letter is in English, and that is why he is afraid to read it. But under the pressure from Indu, he begins reading. The letter reveals that Pushpinder has been reinstated at his previous job, and they apologize for the management error that led to his earlier dismissal. Pushpinder arrives just as Hakim finishes reading, and sighs upon hearing the news. He informs everyone that he won't be returning to Dubai, as he has already started working locally. This sparks a confrontation between Pushpinder and Indu, with her insisting he must go to Dubai to meet the family's needs, but Pushpinder stands firm in his decision to stay. Other family members weigh in, supporting Pushpinder, which eventually leads Indu to reluctantly agree, setting a condition that he must return to Dubai in 6 months. Tensions rise, and Pushpinder leaves the room amid the strained atmosphere. The next morning, Indu sits with her head in her hands, visibly distressed. Annie arrives with a balm for her headache, and they sit down together. They find common ground in their desire for Pushpinder to go to Dubai. Indu suggests a strategy to Annie. She should reject Pushpinder every time he tries to initiate intimacy, and insists that she will only agree if they move to Dubai. Annie is apprehensive about the plan's effectiveness, but before they can discuss it further, Pushpinder unexpectedly reveals himself. He had been listening under the quilt, without their knowledge, and heard everything. Pushpinder erupts into anger, accusing his mother of selfishness and blaming Annie for their troubled marriage. He shouts that marrying Annie was the biggest mistake of his life. The commotion attracts the attention of the entire family, who gather around them. In a fit of rage, Pushpinder slaps Annie across the face when she tries to explain that it was Indu's idea, effectively silencing her. Tears stream down Annie's face as she leaves the room, overwhelmed and hurt by the confrontation. As they all wonder what will happen next, they witness Annie leaving with her bags packed. Despite their attempts to stop her, she remains resolute. They follow her to her parents' house, and when her parents come out, she says that even her father never slapped her in all her life, and now Pushpinder has done this. Her in-laws insist on reconciling, but Annie stands firm. Her heart shatters into a million pieces when her father tells her that since she made such a major decision to marry Pushpinder without consulting them, she cannot return home after such a fight. With a shattered heart, Annie leaves and sits alone on the roadside. As she sits crying on the roadside, Pushpinder sees him from the roof, but never approaches her. His father comes up to her, apologizing on Pushpinder's behalf, but she continues to cry. Pushpinder's grandmother intervenes, urging Annie to return home, emphasizing that if her love fades from Pushpinder's heart, no one will come looking for her. Touched by her words, Annie decides to return. She goes straight to her room and locks herself in. Pushpinder starts spending his days out of the house and sleeps out of the room at night. Despite the passing days, their relationship remains strained and unresolved. As the sun rises over the horizon, a somber atmosphere envelops the Tyagi household. Pushpinder has departed for Dubai without bidding farewell, leaving behind only a letter. Hema blames Annie for his sudden departure, but Indu defends her, taking responsibility for the situation. Annie, seeing everyone's sadness, feels her heartbreak and leaves the room. However, Ika stops her and hands her a letter from Pushpinder. As she reads the letter, tears start flowing from her eyes. Pushpinder expresses regret for slapping her and acknowledges that while his own dreams remain unfulfilled, he wants to fulfill hers. He includes a ticket to Singapore, offering her a chance to pursue her dreams. Overwhelmed with emotion, Annie rushes to her room and breaks down in tears, feeling like a child. Time passes, but Annie's emotional state remains unchanged. She continues to cry and waits anxiously for Pushpinder's return. Memories of their time together flood her mind, and amidst her tears, she realizes the depth of her love for him. She pleads silently for Pushpinder to come back to her. The next morning, Indu is sitting and crying, overwhelmed by the recent events, when she is startled by a presence beside her. To her surprise, it is Pushpinder. He explains that he went to the airport, but couldn't bring himself to leave without meeting his family one last time, so he came back. Crying, Indu apologizes for her behavior and promises never to send him away again. The news of his arrival spreads like wildfire, and everyone except Ani arrives to greet her. Indu tells Pushpinder about Ani's distressed state since he left and urges him to go meet her at her parents' house. Pushpinder rushes to the Awasti home, but upon arrival, he learns that Ani has already left. Meanwhile, Ani returns to the Tyagi house, only to be informed by Indu that Pushpinder has gone to her parents' place. Upon reaching there, she finds out that Pushpinder has gone back, thinking she wasn't there. This frustrating cycle of missing each other continues for a while. Finally, after several rounds of going back and forth between the houses, fate brings them together. When they finally meet, Annie, overwhelmed with emotions, rushes into Pushpinder's arms and embraces him tightly. The moment is filled with tears, apologies, and the profound realization of their love for each other. They hold on to each other, promising never to be separated again. The movie ends with the heartfelt reunion of Pushpinder and Annie. Their relationship, tested by trials and separations, now stands resilient and true. Surrounded by their family and friends, they exchange smiles and laughter, the earlier tensions and conflicts forgotten. Their families come together in a celebration of joy and relief.